German Shepherd was locked in a suitcase and thrown on the road. What baby did next left everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen will shatter your heart and then piece it back together in ways you never expected. What this little boy did when he found an abandoned suitcase on a country road changed everything. Like, share, and comment where you're listening from. You won't believe what happens next. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the winding country road that ran past Tommy Blake's cottage. At just 5 years old, Tommy possessed a kind of awareness that made his grandfather Charlie often wonder if the boy had somehow been born with an old soul. There was something in those large brown eyes, a wisdom, a sensitivity, that seemed impossible for someone who'd barely begun to experience the world. Tommy pressed his small palm against the weathered window pane, watching dust motes dance in the golden light. The cottage sat nestled among rolling hills and ancient oak trees, far enough from town that the stars shone brilliantly at night, untouched by city lights. It wasn't a fancy place by any measure. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the wind whistled through tiny gaps in the window frames during storms. But it was home. "Grandpa, can I go play by the big oak?" Tommy asked, his voice soft but determined. He'd been cooped up inside all morning while rain pattered against the roof. Charlie looked up from his newspaper, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening as he smiled. "The ground's still muddy, buddy. You'll get your shoes all dirty." When he saw the disappointment flicker across Tommy's face, he sighed. "Just stay where I can see you from the porch, okay? And don't go near the road." Tommy's face brightened instantly. "Promise," he said, already racing to grab his rubber boots by the door. Charlie watched his grandson with a mixture of pride and worry. Since Tommy's parents had died in the accident 2 years ago, he'd done his best to give the boy a stable life. Sometimes he worried he wasn't enough, a 70-year-old man raising a child in this isolated cottage. But Tommy seemed to thrive in the countryside, finding wonder in everything from dandelion seeds to thunderstorms. Outside, Tommy splashed through shallow puddles, his laughter carrying on the breeze. The air smelled fresh and clean after the rain, and wildflowers dotted the meadow with splashes of purple and yellow. He collected interesting pebbles and examined a colony of ants rebuilding their hill after the downpour, completely absorbed in his discoveries. A distant rumbling drew his attention to the road. Tommy knew he wasn't supposed to go near it, but curiosity tugged at him as a black van appeared around the bend, moving slowly. Something about it made him crouch lower in the tall grass. The van wasn't like the mail truck or Farmer Wilson's pickup. It was sleek and dark with tinted windows that hid whoever was inside. Tommy held his breath as the van crawled to a stop just beyond his grandfather's property. The engine idled for a moment before the rear door slid open. A man in a dark jacket jumped out, dragging something heavy behind him, a large, scuffed suitcase that seemed to be moving on its own. A chill ran down Tommy's spine as he watched, instinctively knowing he was witnessing something he shouldn't be. The man looked around furtively before heaving the suitcase onto the ground beside the road. As it landed with a thud, Tommy heard a sound that made his blood run cold, a muffled whimper coming from inside. Without hesitation, the man jumped back into the van, and it sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the abandoned suitcase. For several long minutes, Tommy remained frozen, fear and curiosity waging war inside him. Grandpa had warned him countless times about strangers, about the dangers that could lurk beyond their little haven. But the whimpering continued, weak and frightened, impossible to ignore. "Grandpa's on the porch," Tommy whispered to himself, glancing back at the cottage where Charlie had dozed off in his rocking chair, newspaper across his lap. "I'll just take a quick look." His heart pounded in his ears as he crept toward the road, keeping low in the grass. The suitcase was larger than any Tommy had ever seen, its once black surface now scuffed and dirty. As he drew closer, the whimpering grew more distinct, a sound of pain and fear that made Tommy's chest tighten. "Hello?" he whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch the hard shell of the case. The whimpering stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that Tommy wondered if he'd imagined the sound altogether. Then came a soft scratching from inside, desperate and weak. Tommy's small hands found the zipper, and before he could reconsider, he began to pull it open, just a crack at first. A strange, unpleasant smell wafted out, like the time Grandpa had forgotten to put the chicken in the refrigerator mixed with something medicinal and sharp. Tommy wrinkled his nose but didn't back away. "I won't hurt you," he promised, pulling the zipper further. What he saw next made him gasp, his hand flying to his mouth. Inside the cramped, dark space lay a German shepherd, its once beautiful coat matted with dirt and what looked horribly like dried blood. The dog's amber eyes, clouded with pain, met Tommy's, and in that moment, something passed between them, a recognition, a desperate plea. The animal's ribs protruded sharply beneath its skin, and one of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. A heavy metal collar, scratched and dented, encircled its neck. "Oh," Tommy breathed, tears filling his eyes. "Who did this to you?" The dog tried to lift its head but couldn't seem to find the strength. Its tongue lolled out, dry and cracked. Tommy realized with a jolt that the poor creature was severely dehydrated. "Wait right here," he whispered, as if the dog had any choice. "I'll help you. I promise." Tommy ran back toward the cottage, careful to stay out of his grandfather's line of sight. He grabbed his water bottle from where he'd left it on the porch steps and scurried back to the suitcase, his heart racing with urgency. The German shepherd hadn't moved, its breathing shallow and labored. Tommy unscrewed the cap of his water bottle with shaking hands and tried to figure out how to help the dog drink. Finally, he cupped his hand, poured a small amount of water into his palm, and held it near the dog's muzzle. At first, the shepherd didn't respond, but when a drop touched its nose, its tongue darted out weakly. Tommy continued, patient and gentle, until the dog had lapped up most of the water in his small hands. "You need a name," Tommy murmured, studying the dog more carefully. Despite the dirt and injuries, he could see the animal had once been beautiful. A crescent-shaped white mark stood out against the darker fur on its chest. "I'll call you Star because of this mark. It's like a star in the night sky." Star's eyes seemed to brighten slightly at the sound of Tommy's voice, a glimmer of trust forming amid the pain and fear. Tommy examined the collar more closely, noticing that what he'd initially thought were dents were actually deliberate scratches. Someone had tried to obliterate whatever had been engraved there. "Were you someone's dog?" Tommy asked softly. "Did you run away? Or did they—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the thought, the idea that someone would intentionally hurt an animal this way too terrible to contemplate. As the initial shock wore off, Tommy faced a dilemma. Star was too large and too injured for him to carry home, but leaving her here, exposed to the elements and whoever might pass by, wasn't an option either. The sky was darkening, and with night would come lower temperatures. "I can't take you home right now," Tommy explained, his voice breaking. "Grandpa doesn't know I'm here, and he might be mad, but I won't leave you alone." Tommy shrugged off his jacket, his favorite blue one with rocket ships on the sleeves, and very gently laid it over Star's trembling form. The dog's eyes followed his movements, wary but increasingly trusting. "I'll make you a proper shelter," Tommy decided, gathering fallen branches and arranging them around the suitcase to form a crude windbreak. He used leaves and grass to create a sort of nest, insulating the space as best he could with his limited resources. Throughout his work, Tommy spoke softly to Star, telling her about his life with Grandpa, about the treehouse they were planning to build in the spring, about his collection of rocks that sparkled in the sunlight. He wasn't sure if the dog understood his words, but his gentle voice seemed to calm her. "I'll come back tomorrow with food," Tommy promised, reluctantly preparing to leave as the sun dipped below the horizon. "And more water, and maybe medicine if I can find some in Grandpa's cabinet." As Tommy stood to go, Star made a soft, plaintive sound that tore at his heart. He knelt again, carefully stroking the least injured part of her head. "I promise I'll come back," he whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Walking home in the gathering dusk, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He paused, scanning the trees that lined the property. For a moment, he thought he saw movement among the shadows, a figure standing motionless between two chopped oaks. But when he blinked, there was nothing. A cold shiver ran down his spine, and Tommy quickened his pace, suddenly desperate to reach the safety of the cottage and his grandfather's protective presence. The weight of his discovery, and his promise to return, pressed heavily on his small shoulders. Charlie was awake when Tommy climbed the porch steps, his weathered face creased with concern. "Where have you been, buddy? I dozed off for a bit and nearly had a heart attack when I couldn't see you." Tommy avoided his grandfather's eyes, uncomfortable with the need to lie, but knowing he couldn't reveal Star's existence just yet. "I was looking at tadpoles in the pond," he said, the half-truth bitter on his tongue. Charlie studied him for a moment, noting the missing jacket and the mud caking his grandson's boots. "Where's your coat? It's getting chilly." I left it by the pond, Tommy said, the lie growing bigger. I forgot it. Can I get it tomorrow? Charlie frowned but nodded. You need to be more careful with your things, Tommy. That jacket wasn't cheap. He ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. Come on inside now. I've made soup, and you must be starving after all your exploring. Throughout dinner, Tommy was uncharacteristically quiet, his mind racing with plans to help Star. He would need food, lots of it, since the dog was clearly starving, and something for her injuries, and he would need to be careful to avoid arousing his grandfather's suspicions. You're awfully thoughtful tonight, Charlie observed, breaking the silence. Everything okay at school? Tommy nodded quickly. Yes, Grandpa. Just thinking about a story Mrs. Phillips told us. Oh, what kind of story? Tommy stirred his soup, searching for a believable answer. About animals, how we should be kind to them and help them when they're hurt. Charlie's expression softened. That's very true. Your grandmother used to nurse all kinds of critters back to health. Birds with broken wings, rabbits caught in traps. She had a special way with animals. His eyes grew distant, lost in memories. Maybe you inherited that from her. Tommy felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, when the time was right, Grandpa would understand why he had to help Star. Maybe he would even help too. But for now, this secret belonged to Tommy alone. When Charlie tucked him into bed that night, Tommy struggled to fall asleep. The image of Star, alone and injured in the makeshift shelter, haunted him. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the trees and rattling the old window frames of the cottage. Please be okay, Tommy whispered into the darkness. Please still be there tomorrow. In the morning, Tommy was up before the sun, an unusual occurrence that didn't escape his grandfather's notice. What's got you up with the roosters? Charlie asked, watching Tommy gobble down his breakfast with unprecedented speed. Just excited to play outside, Tommy replied, avoiding eye contact by focusing intently on his cereal. Can I take some snacks with me in case I get hungry later? Charlie raised an eyebrow but nodded. Sure thing. Take a banana and some of those granola bars from the pantry, and don't forget your jacket today. Tommy's stomach twisted with guilt. Actually, Grandpa, I think it might rain again. Can I take my raincoat instead? While his grandfather's attention was diverted by the morning news on the radio, Tommy raided the refrigerator, wrapping leftover chicken and a slice of cheese in a napkin and stuffing it into his backpack. He added the granola bars, a bottle of water, and, after a moment's hesitation, the small first aid kit he found under the bathroom sink. The morning air was crisp and cool as Tommy raced down the familiar path, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. What if Star wasn't there? What if whoever had abandoned her had returned during the night? Relief flooded through him when he spotted the suitcase, still nestled within his makeshift shelter. But as he drew closer, he realized something was wrong. The suitcase was open wider than he'd left it, and his jacket lay discarded on the ground beside it. Star? He called softly, fear clutching at his throat. A weak whine answered him, not from the suitcase but from several feet away. Tommy spotted her then, a dark shape partially hidden in the tall grass, as if she'd dragged herself away from the road. Tommy approached slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief. Despite her injuries, Star had somehow managed to crawl nearly 15 feet from where he'd left her. She lay panting in the grass, her amber eyes fixed on Tommy with unmistakable recognition. You moved, Tommy exclaimed, dropping to his knees beside her. You're stronger than you look. Then, with dawning understanding, you were trying to follow me home, weren't you? Star's tail thumped once against the ground, a tiny gesture that sent joy surging through Tommy. He immediately opened his backpack, retrieving the chicken and holding it out on his palm. Eat slowly, he cautioned, remembering something his grandfather had once mentioned about not giving too much food at once to very hungry animals. Star sniffed the offering, and then, with surprising gentleness for a creature so starved, took the chicken from Tommy's hand. She ate with desperate hunger, but careful restraint, as if savoring each morsel. While she ate, Tommy assessed her condition in the clear morning light. Her injuries looked even worse than he'd initially thought. The fur along her back was missing in patches, revealing raw, inflamed skin beneath. The bent leg was swollen at the joint, and crusted blood matted the fur around a deep gash on her shoulder. You need a doctor, Tommy murmured, his eyes filling with tears, but I don't think I can take you to one. He remembered the first aid kit and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were bandages, antiseptic wipes, and a tube of antibiotic ointment. Tommy had watched his grandfather clean and bandage his scraped knee enough times to have a basic understanding of wound care. "This might hurt," he warned Star, uncapping the antiseptic wipes, "but it will help you get better." To his surprise, Star remained perfectly still as he cleaned her wounds, flinching only slightly when he touched the most tender areas. She watched him with those intelligent amber eyes, as if she understood he was trying to help. When he'd done what he could with his limited supplies, Tommy sat back on his heels, considering their situation. Star couldn't stay out here indefinitely. She needed proper shelter, regular food, and probably medicine that Tommy couldn't provide. "I need to find you a better place," he told her, scratching gently behind her ears. "Somewhere safe where no one will find you." Tommy thought hard, mentally cataloging all the potential hiding spots on his grandfather's property. The old tool shed was too close to the house. Grandpa went there almost daily. The root cellar was too damp and dark. But then he remembered something, a small, abandoned groundskeeper's shed at the far edge of the property, tucked away among a stand of pine trees. Grandpa had mentioned once that it belonged to the previous owner, who had employed a gardener to maintain the extensive grounds before they fell into their current semi-wild state. Tommy had explored it months ago and found it dry and sturdy, if somewhat dusty and forgotten. "I know where we can go," he told Star excitedly, "but you'll have to trust me. It's not far, but you'll need to walk a little. Do you think you can?" As if understanding the challenge, Star struggled to her feet, wobbling precariously but remaining upright. Her injured leg barely touched the ground as she balanced on the other three, determination evident in every line of her body. "Good girl," Tommy breathed, amazed at her resilience. "We'll go slow. You can lean on me if you need to." The journey to the groundskeeper's shed was arduous. Every few steps, Star would need to rest, her breathing labored and her good legs trembling with exertion. Tommy stayed beside her, offering encouragement and support, sometimes bracing his small body against hers when she seemed in danger of falling. It took nearly an hour to cover a distance that Tommy could normally walk in 10 minutes, but finally, the small wooden structure came into view, partially obscured by overgrown bushes and low-hanging pine branches. "We made it," Tommy said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "This is going to be your home for a while." The shed's door creaked as Tommy pushed it open, revealing a square room about 8 feet on each side. Dusty garden tools hung from hooks on one wall, and an old workbench occupied another. Cobwebs festooned the corners of the ceiling, and the single window was grimy with years of neglect. But it was dry and sheltered, and most importantly, it was hidden from view of both the main road and the cottage. Tommy helped Star inside, clearing a space in the corner, furthest from the draft of the door. "Wait here," he instructed, as if she had anywhere else to go. "I'll be right back." Tommy raced to the cottage, relieved to find that his grandfather had gone into town for groceries, a weekly ritual that usually kept him away for at least 2 hours. Seizing the opportunity, Tommy gathered blankets from the linen closet, a plastic mixing bowl that could serve as a water dish, and as much food as he thought he could take without being noticed. By the time he returned to the shed, Star had settled in the corner, her eyes watchful but less fearful than before. Tommy laid out the blankets, creating a soft nest in the corner, and filled the bowl with fresh water from his bottle. "There," he said, stepping back to survey his work. "It's not perfect, but it's better than a suitcase by the road, right?" As if in agreement, Star dragged herself onto the blankets, circling 3 times before settling with a deep sigh that seemed to release some of the tension from her body. For the first time since Tommy had found her, he thought he detected a hint of peace in her amber eyes. Tommy spent the rest of the morning cleaning the shed, making it as comfortable as possible for his new friend. He wiped down the window to let in more light, swept away the cobwebs, and arranged the remaining blankets to block drafts from the gaps in the wooden walls. As he worked, he talked to Star, telling her stories and making plans for her recovery. He'd need to find a way to get her proper dog food, maybe medicine for her leg. It would be challenging to do all this without his grandfather finding out, but Tommy was determined. While cleaning off the workbench, Tommy discovered an old radio beneath a canvas drop cloth. To his delight, it still worked, crackling to life when he turned the dial. "You can listen to music while I'm gone," he told Star, setting it to a station that played soft classical pieces, "so you won't feel so alone." As midday approached, Tommy knew he needed to return to the cottage before his grandfather got back from town. He knelt beside Star, gently stroking her head. "I have to go now, but I'll come back this evening with more food," he promised. "You're safe here. No one knows about this place except me." Star lifted her head and did something that made Tommy's heart swell. She licked his hand, a gentle gesture of trust and gratitude that brought tears to his eyes. "You're welcome," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my friend now, and I'll take care of you." As Tommy checked back over his work, the blankets, the water, the food, he noticed something unusual about Star's collar. In the better light of the shed, he could see that there was a small, almost invisible seam along one side. Curiosity piqued, he examined it more closely. "What's this?" he murmured, his small fingers probing the leather. To his surprise, a section of the collar opened like a tiny compartment, revealing something metallic embedded in the lining. "You have a computer chip in your collar!" Tommy had learned about microchips in pets during a visit from a veterinarian to his school. Mrs. Phillips had explained that chips helped lost animals find their way home, but why would someone try to destroy the information on Star's collar if they wanted her to be found? A chill ran down Tommy's spine as he realized the implications. Star wasn't just abandoned. Someone had deliberately tried to erase her identity to make sure she couldn't be traced back to them. "Someone's looking for you," he whispered, half to himself. "But are they good people or bad people?" Star's ears pricked forward at his words, her eyes suddenly alert. A low growl rumbled in her throat, and she struggled to her feet, staring intently at the shed door. Tommy froze, listening. At first, he heard nothing beyond the usual sounds of the countryside, birds calling, the rustle of wind through the pines. But then came a new sound, the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path that led from the main road to his grandfather's cottage. Moving quietly to the window, Tommy peered through the grimy glass. A black car, not the van from yesterday, but similar in its sleek, anonymous appearance, was parked at the edge of the property. A figure in a dark coat was walking toward the cottage, their stride purposeful and somehow menacing. Tommy's heart pounded in his chest. Something told him that this visitor was connected to Star, that the person who had hurt her, who had left her to die in that suitcase, was now at his home, perhaps asking questions, looking for her. "I won't let them find you," Tommy whispered fiercely, returning to Star's side. "I promise." The dog's eyes met his, deep and knowing, filled with a trust that Tommy was determined not to betray. He settled beside her on the blankets, one arm draped protectively over her battered body, and together they waited, listening to the classical music that drifted softly from the old radio, creating a bubble of calm in a suddenly dangerous world. For the first time since finding the suitcase by the road, Tommy felt truly afraid. Not just concerned or worried, but genuinely frightened. Whoever had done this to Star, whoever was now at his grandfather's door, was capable of terrible cruelty. And now Tommy was involved, a small boy standing between a wounded animal and those who wished her harm. But as Star's warmth seeped into him, as her breathing synchronized with his own, Tommy's fear began to transform into something else, a fierce, protective resolve that seemed too big for his 5-year-old frame, but filled him completely nonetheless. "We'll figure this out together," he promised Star, his voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "And no matter what happens, I'll keep you safe." Tommy spent every spare moment over the next 3 days in the old groundskeeper's shed with Star. Each morning before school, he would sneak out early to bring her fresh water and food. Each afternoon, he would rush through his homework at the kitchen table, bouncing impatiently in his chair until Grandpa Charlie said he could go outside to play. The shed had transformed under Tommy's dedicated care. He'd scavenge more blankets from the linen closet at home, claiming he wanted to build a fort in the woods. He'd found an old lantern in the basement that still worked, providing warm light during his evening visits. A collection of mismatched bowls now served as Star's feeding station, and Tommy had even dragged an old rug from the garage to cover the cold wooden floor. Star was improving, if slowly. The deep gash on her shoulder was beginning to heal, thanks to Tommy's careful cleaning and application of antibiotic ointment. She could now stand and walk short distances without trembling, though her injured leg remained stiff and clearly painful. Most remarkable was the change in her eyes. The fearful, haunted look had been replaced by alertness and affection whenever Tommy appeared. "You're getting better," Tommy told her proudly, watching as she polished off a bowl of kibble he'd purchased with his saved allowance money at the small market in town. "Soon, you'll be strong enough to come home with me." Tommy had decided that when Star was healthy enough, he would finally tell Grandpa Charlie about her. His grandfather had been a veterinarian before retiring, after all, Surely he would understand why Tommy had to help the abandoned dog. And maybe, just maybe, they could keep her. On the fourth day since finding Star, Tommy arrived at the shed to find her unusually agitated. She paced the small space, occasionally stopping to stare intently at the door, a low growl rumbling in her throat. "What's wrong, girl?" Tommy asked, setting down his backpack filled with the day's supplies. "Did something scare you?" Star whined, her ears pricked forward in the alert position Tommy had come to recognize as her warning signal. She limped to the grimy window and stood on her hind legs to peer out, her entire body tense. Tommy joined her, scanning the tree line surrounding the shed. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the familiar pine trees swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. But then, a flash of movement caught his eye. Something, or someone, was moving through the woods, just at the edge of visibility. "Stay here," Tommy whispered, his heart hammering in his chest. "I'll go check." Star growled louder, placing herself between Tommy and the door, clearly trying to prevent him from leaving. Her protective instinct touched Tommy deeply, but he was determined to find out if they were in danger. "I'll be careful," he promised, gently maneuvering around her. "I'm just going to look. If someone's out there, we need to know." Reluctantly, Star backed down, watching anxiously as Tommy slipped out the door. Outside, Tommy crouched low in the underbrush, making himself as small and invisible as possible, a skill he'd perfected during countless games of hide-and-seek with neighborhood kids. The woods were quiet except for birdsong and the rustling of leaves. Tommy waited, barely breathing, his eyes scanning methodically from left to right. Just as he was beginning to think he'd imagined the movement, he spotted it again, a dark figure moving between the trees, heading away from the shed and toward the main property. Tommy followed at a safe distance, curiosity overwhelming his caution. The figure, a man in a dark jacket and cap, seemed to be searching for something, occasionally stopping to examine the ground or peer into dense undergrowth. With a jolt of fear, Tommy realized the man was following a trail, his trail, the path he took between the cottage and the shed multiple times a day. Panic surged through him. If the man followed the trail to its end, he would find the shed. He would find Star. Without conscious thought, Tommy picked up a pine cone and threw it as hard as he could in the opposite direction. It landed with a satisfying thud, causing a rustle in the bushes about 30 feet away. The man's head snapped toward the sound, and he immediately changed direction, moving away from the path to the shed. Tommy's relief was short-lived. As the man turned, his cap shifted, and Tommy caught a glimpse of his face. Cold, hard features with a jagged scar running from his right temple to his jaw. It was a face he would never forget. Heart pounding, Tommy retreated to the shed, slipping inside and locking the door behind him. Star greeted him with frantic licks and worried whines, sensing his distress. "Someone's looking for you," Tommy whispered, sinking to the floor and wrapping his arms around Star's neck. "But I won't let them find you. I promise." That evening, Tommy carefully inspected the area around the shed, using a branch to sweep away his footprints and disguise the path he used. He gathered fallen branches and arranged them to create a natural-looking barrier around the shed, making it appear abandoned and inaccessible. "We need to be extra careful now," he told Star as darkness fell. "I'll come less often so they can't follow me, but I'll bring enough food each time." Star watched him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. She nuzzled his hand, her warm breath on his skin, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. Tommy was reluctant to leave that night, but he knew Grandpa Charlie would worry if he stayed out after dark. With a final pat to Star's head, he slipped out into the twilight, taking a deliberately circuitous route back to the cottage to throw off any potential followers. The next morning, Tommy awoke to unusual sounds. Cars on the gravel driveway, voices at the front door. Peering out his bedroom window, he spotted two unfamiliar vehicles parked outside. One was a sleek black sedan that sent a chill down his spine. The other was an official-looking truck with some kind of logo on the side that he couldn't quite make out. Tommy dressed quickly and crept down the stairs, careful to avoid the third step that always creaked. In the living room, he found Grandpa Charlie talking to two visitors, a tall woman in an expensive-looking suit and a man in uniform. "Tommy," Charlie called, spotting him hovering in the doorway. "Come in, buddy. These people want to ask us some questions." The woman smiled at Tommy, but something about the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Thomas. My name is Ms. Reed. I work for Sunnydale Animal Shelter." She held out a glossy business card, which Charlie took. "We're looking for a missing dog, a German Shepherd that may have wandered into this area." Tommy's blood ran cold, but he kept his face carefully neutral, just as he did when pretending to be surprised by birthday presents he'd accidentally discovered in Grandpa's closet. "A lost dog?" Charlie repeated, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in concern. "We haven't seen any strays around here, have we, Tommy?" All eyes turned to him, and Tommy felt sweat break out on his palms. The uniformed man, who hadn't introduced himself, was watching him with unnerving intensity. "No, Grandpa," Tommy said, proud of how steady his voice sounded. "No dogs." Ms. Reed's smile tightened. "This is a very special dog, Thomas. She's a therapy animal who helps sick people feel better. She went missing during a training exercise near here. We're very worried about her." "What does she look like?" Charlie asked, his tone friendly but with an undercurrent of suspicion that gave Tommy hope. His grandfather had always been good at spotting dishonesty. "German Shepherd, about 2 years old," Ms. Reed replied. "She might be injured or disoriented. She's wearing a black collar with a tag." Tommy noticed that Ms. Reed didn't mention the scratched-out markings on the collar or the hidden compartment with the microchip. Something wasn't right. "Well, we'll certainly keep an eye out," Charlie said, walking toward the door in a clear signal that the conversation was ending. "If we see anything, we'll call the number on your card." "We'd appreciate that," Ms. Reed said, her voice cooling slightly. "We've had reports of a small boy being seen with a dog matching this description in the area." Tommy's heart skipped a beat, but Charlie merely laughed. "Must be someone else's grandson. Tommy here is allergic to dogs. Can't get near him without sneezing up a storm." Tommy forced a weak smile, silently thanking his grandfather for the lie, though he wasn't sure why Charlie had told it. Had he somehow guessed that something was wrong? After the visitors left, Charlie stood at the window, watching their vehicles disappear down the driveway. When they were out of sight, he turned to Tommy with a serious expression. "Now, why don't you tell me what that was really about?" he asked quietly. "And don't say nothing. I wasn't born yesterday." Tommy's lower lip trembled. He'd been keeping his secret for days, carrying the weight of responsibility alone. Now, faced with his grandfather's gentle but firm questioning, the dam broke. "I found a dog," he confessed, tears welling in his eyes. "She was hurt really bad, Grandpa. Someone put her in a suitcase and threw her away like trash. I had to help her. I had to." Instead of the anger or disappointment Tommy expected, Charlie's weathered face softened with compassion. He knelt down, bringing himself to Tommy's level. "Where is she now?" he asked gently. "In the old groundskeeper's shed," Tommy whispered. "I've been taking care of her. She's getting better, but her leg is still hurt. And now those people are looking for her. But they're not good people, Grandpa. They're the ones who hurt her. I know it." Charlie was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as if remembering something from long ago. Finally, he sighed deeply. "I should have known," he murmured, more to himself than to Tommy. "You have your grandmother's heart." "Are you mad?" Tommy asked in a small voice. Charlie shook his head. "No, buddy, I'm not mad, but I am concerned. If what you're saying is true, those people might be dangerous, and that dog needs proper medical care." "Can you help her?" Tommy asked eagerly. "You were an animal doctor, right? Before you retired?" A shadow passed over Charlie's face. "It's been a long time since I practiced, Tommy, but yes, I was a veterinarian for nearly 40 years. "Then you can fix Star!" Tommy exclaimed, hope surging through him. "That's what I named her, Star." "Star, huh?" Charlie smiled faintly. "Let me get my old medical bag from the attic. Then you can take me to her." Half an hour later, Tommy led his grandfather through the woods to the hidden shed. He had mixed feelings, relief at no longer carrying his secret alone, but anxiety about involving Grandpa in what was clearly a dangerous situation. "You've done a good job hiding this place," Charlie commented as they approached the shed, now almost invisible behind Tommy's arrangement of branches and foliage. "Smart thinking." Pride swelled in Tommy's chest at the rare compliment. "I didn't want the bad people to find her." Inside the shed, Star greeted Tommy with her usual enthusiasm, but froze at the sight of Charlie, a low growl rumbling in her throat. "It's okay, girl," Tommy soothed, placing a reassuring hand on her head. "This is my grandpa. He's going to help you." Charlie remained in the doorway, making no move to approach the frightened dog. Instead, he spoke softly, his voice taking on a rhythmic, calming quality that Tommy had never heard before. Easy now, Star. Easy, girl. You've been through a lot, haven't you? But you're safe here. Tommy's been taking good care of you, and now I'm here to help too. Gradually, Star's growl subsided, and her rigid posture relaxed slightly. Charlie nodded approvingly. She's been badly abused, he observed, his voice tight with controlled anger. But she still trusts. That says a lot about her character, and about yours, Tommy. Slowly, with Tommy's reassuring presence, Charlie was able to approach Star and begin his examination. His hands moved with practiced confidence despite the years away from his profession, gently probing the injured leg, checking the healing wounds, examining her eyes and ears. She's malnourished but not severely dehydrated thanks to your care, Charlie told Tommy. The leg isn't broken, but there's soft tissue damage, a bad sprain or tear. The wounds are healing clean, no infection. You did good, buddy. Tommy beamed with pride and relief. Can we keep her, Grandpa? Please? Charlie's expression grew serious again. It's not that simple. Those people today, they weren't from any animal shelter I've ever heard of, and that man wasn't any kind of animal control officer. I knew it, Tommy whispered. They're the bad people who hurt Star. Maybe, Charlie agreed, but why? What's so special about this dog that they'd go to all this trouble to find her? As if in answer to his question, Star suddenly stood up, alert and tense. She limped to the corner where Tommy had placed his backpack and began pawing at it urgently. What is it, girl? Tommy asked, retrieving the bag. Star continued to paw at it until Tommy opened it and emptied the contents onto the floor. Among his school books and lunchbox was Star's collar, which Tommy had removed days ago when he noticed it was chafing her neck. Star nosed the collar insistently, then looked up at Charlie with an intelligence that made him inhale sharply. She's trying to tell us something, he murmured, picking up the collar and examining it closely. This isn't an ordinary collar. Charlie's fingers found the hidden seam that Tommy had discovered earlier. He opened the compartment, revealing the microchip embedded inside. This isn't a standard pet microchip, Charlie said, his voice filled with wonder. It's something much more sophisticated. And look here. He pointed to the scratched-out markings. Under this damage, there's a military insignia. Military? Tommy repeated, confused. Like soldiers? Charlie nodded slowly. Star isn't just any German shepherd, Tommy. I think she might be a military working dog, maybe even a special forces dog. Is that why the bad people want her back? Tommy asked, unconsciously moving closer to Star, his hand protectively on her back. I don't know, Charlie admitted, but I intend to find out. And until we know what's going on, we need to keep Star hidden and safe. Charlie began repacking his medical bag, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. We should move her to the house. The shed is too exposed, and she needs better care than we can provide out here. But what if the bad people come back? Let me worry about that, Charlie said, a hard edge entering his voice that Tommy had never heard before. I didn't spend 4 years in the army to be intimidated in my own home. Tommy stared at his grandfather in surprise. You were in the army? You never told me that. A faint smile touched Charlie's lips. There are a lot of things about my life before you came to live with me that I haven't told you. Maybe it's time I did. As they gathered Star's belongings and prepared to move her to the cottage, a sharp crack echoed through the woods, the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping under someone's foot. Star's ears pricked forward, and a low, warning growl rumbled in her chest. Charlie immediately doused the lantern, plunging the shed into darkness. He placed a finger against his lips, signaling for Tommy to stay quiet. In the heavy silence that followed, they could hear it clearly. Footsteps, moving stealthily through the underbrush, coming steadily closer to the shed. Tommy's heart pounded so loudly, he was sure it would give them away. In the dim light filtering through the grimy window, he could see Star's outline as she positioned herself between the door and Tommy, every muscle in her body tense and ready. Charlie reached into his medical bag and withdrew something Tommy couldn't identify in the darkness. Then his grandfather leaned close, his breath warm against Tommy's ear as he whispered, "When I open the door, I want you to take Star and run straight home. Don't stop. Don't look back. Go to the basement and lock the door behind you. Do you understand?" Tommy nodded, fear closing his throat and making speech impossible. "Good boy," Charlie murmured, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Ready?" The footsteps were just outside now, a shadow falling across the window as someone peered inside. Tommy held his breath, his arms wrapped tightly around Star's neck. Charlie counted down silently on his fingers. 3, 2, 1. The shed door burst open, and chaos erupted in the small space. Charlie shouted something Tommy couldn't understand. There was a bright flash and a loud bang, and then Tommy was running, half-dragging Star through the underbrush, branches whipping at his face, and tears streaming down his cheeks. Behind him, he could hear angry voices and the sound of a struggle. Every instinct screamed at him to go back, to help his grandfather, but Tommy kept running, Star limping valiantly at his side, both of them driven by pure terror and the desperate need to reach the safety of home. What happened next would forever change their lives, but in that moment, all Tommy knew was that he had to keep his promise, to protect Star, no matter what. Who do you think was outside the shed? Was it Ms. Reed and her men, or could it be someone else looking for Star? Tommy burst through the back door of the cottage, his lungs burning, and his legs trembling from the frantic race through the woods. Star limped in behind him, her injured leg barely touching the ground, but her determination matching his own. Without pausing to catch his breath, Tommy led Star down the basement stairs, just as Grandpa Charlie had instructed. The basement was cold and dimly lit, with concrete floors and walls lined with dusty shelves of canned goods and old boxes. Tommy locked the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs, then sank to the floor, his small chest heaving with exertion and fear. "We made it," he whispered, pulling Star close. The German Shepherd was panting heavily, her tongue lolling from her mouth, but her amber eyes remained alert, fixed on the locked door above them. Tommy's mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Who had found their hiding place? What had happened to Grandpa? The memory of Charlie's face, determined and somehow different than the grandfather he knew, kept replaying in his mind. "Grandpa will be okay," Tommy told Star, trying to convince himself as much as the dog. "He knows what to do." As his breathing slowed and his heartbeat steadied, Tommy began to explore the basement more thoroughly. He'd rarely come down here. It had always seemed a boring place full of cobwebs and old junk. Now, with fresh eyes, he saw it differently. This wasn't just a storage space. It was a potential fortress. The small windows near the ceiling were too high for anyone to climb through easily. The door at the top of the stairs was solid oak, its lock sturdy and well-maintained, and the basement itself was a maze of old furniture, storage boxes, and forgotten treasures that could provide countless hiding places. "We can stay here until Grandpa comes back," Tommy decided, creating a comfortable spot for Star behind an old sofa where they would be hidden from view of the stairs. He found some old blankets in a plastic bin and arranged them into a nest, then filled a dusty mixing bowl with water from the utility sink in the corner. Star settled onto the blankets with a grateful sigh, but her posture remained vigilant, her ears pricking at every creak and groan of the old house above them. Tommy sat beside her, one hand resting on her back, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. As minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of Charlie, Tommy's anxiety grew. He should go look for his grandfather, make sure he was okay. But leaving the safety of the basement meant potentially encountering whoever had been at the shed, the people who had hurt Star and wanted her back. "What should we do, girl?" Tommy whispered. Star's response was to press closer to him, her warmth a silent reassurance that they were in this together. The decision was taken out of his hands when a sharp bang echoed from upstairs, the front door slamming open against the wall. Heavy footsteps crossed the living room floor, followed by the sound of drawers being yanked open and furniture being overturned. Tommy froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. Someone was searching the house, and judging by the crash of breaking glass and the thud of objects being thrown to the floor, they weren't concerned about being subtle. Star went rigid beside him, a low growl building in her throat. Tommy quickly placed his hand over her muzzle, silently pleading with her to stay quiet. The last thing they needed was for Star's protective instincts to give away their hiding place. The footsteps moved from room to room, methodical and purposeful. Whoever was up there knew exactly what they were looking for. Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs as the footsteps approached the basement door, followed by the rattle of the locked handle. A muffled curse filtered through the heavy door, then a thud as something, or someone, slammed against it. The old wood creaked but held firm. Another thud, harder this time. The hinges groaned in protest. Tommy backed deeper into their hiding place, pulling Star with him. Tears streamed silently down his face as he buried it in Star's fur, trying to muffle his terrified breathing. A third impact shook the door, and this time there was an ominous crack of splintering wood. One more hit, and they would be through. But instead of a fourth assault on the door, there came a new sound, a familiar voice raised in anger. "Get the hell out of my house!" Grandpa Charlie's voice, strong and commanding, rang through the cottage. There was a scuffle above, the crash of something heavy falling, a sharp cry of pain, then more footsteps, running this time, and the slam of the front door. Silence fell, broken only by Tommy's racing heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, softly, a knock on the basement door. "Tommy? It's me. It's safe to come out now." Relief flooded through Tommy at the sound of his grandfather's voice, but Star wasn't convinced. She remained tense, her eyes fixed on the door with suspicion. "How do I know it's really you?" Tommy called, suddenly wary. What if the intruder was forcing Grandpa to call him out? A soft chuckle came from the other side of the door. "Smart boy. When you were 3, you flushed your favorite toy truck down the toilet because you wanted to see if it would swim to the ocean. We had to call a plumber on Christmas Eve." Only Grandpa would know that embarrassing story. Tommy rushed to unlock the door, flinging it open to find Charlie standing there, disheveled but intact. A cut above his right eye was bleeding slightly, and his knuckles were raw, but he was smiling. "You okay, buddy?" Charlie asked, kneeling to wrap Tommy in a fierce hug. "I was so scared," Tommy admitted, burying his face in his grandfather's familiar flannel shirt. "Who were they? What did they want?" "Let's get you and Star somewhere safer, and then we'll talk," Charlie said, his voice gentle, but his eyes scanning the basement stairs as if expecting another attack at any moment. Charlie led them through the cottage, which looked like it had been hit by a tornado, furniture overturned, pictures knocked from walls, books scattered across the floor. He didn't stop in any of the rooms, but continued straight to the garage, where his old pickup truck was parked. "Climb in," he instructed, opening the passenger door. "Star, too." Tommy helped Star into the truck, noticing with concern that her limp seemed worse after their panicked run through the woods. Charlie slid behind the wheel and started the engine, backing out of the garage with unusual haste. "Where are we going?" Tommy asked as they sped down the gravel driveway, the cottage growing smaller in the side mirror. "Somewhere safe," Charlie replied, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. "Somewhere we can figure out what's going on with Star and why these people want her so badly." They drove in silence for several minutes, taking back roads and turning frequently, as if Charlie was trying to make sure they weren't being followed. Tommy watched the familiar landscape of their small town give way to open countryside, farms giving way to thicker woods as they headed into the hills. Finally, Charlie pulled off onto a narrow dirt track that Tommy had never noticed before, nearly invisible between 2 large oak trees. The truck bumped along the rutted path until a small cabin came into view, nestled in a clearing and surrounded by dense forest. "What is this place?" Tommy asked, as Charlie parked and killed the engine. "It belonged to a friend of mine," Charlie explained, helping Star down from the truck. "He left it to me when he died, but I haven't used it much. Few people know it exists, which makes it perfect for us right now." Inside, the cabin was basic but comfortable. A single room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchenette, a battered sofa, and a narrow bed in the corner. A thick layer of dust covered everything, evidence of long disuse. "We'll stay here tonight," Charlie said, pulling sheets off the furniture. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next move." As Charlie busied himself lighting the fireplace and making the cabin habitable, Tommy settled on the sofa with Star, stroking her fur and murmuring reassurances. Now that the immediate danger had passed, his mind was filled with questions. "Grandpa," he said finally, "who were those people? What do they want with Star?" Charlie sighed heavily, sitting down beside Tommy on the sofa. In the flickering firelight, his face looked older, more lined with worry than Tommy had ever seen it. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted, "but I have a theory. When I examined Star's collar, I noticed something about the military insignia that was scratched out. It belonged to a specialized unit, one that trains dogs for very sensitive missions." "Like spy dogs?" Tommy asked, his eyes widening. Charlie smiled faintly. "Not exactly, but close. These dogs are trained to detect things that humans can't, certain chemicals, explosives, even electronic devices. They're incredibly valuable. Is that why they want Star back?" "Maybe," Charlie said, his expression troubled. "But if they just wanted a valuable military dog, why not report her missing through official channels? Why this elaborate charade about being from an animal shelter? And why?" He trailed off, his eyes darkening with anger. "Why treat her so badly?" Star seemed to understand they were talking about her. She lifted her head, her amber eyes moving between Tommy and Charlie with that uncanny intelligence that had struck them both. "I think," Charlie continued slowly, that Star saw something she wasn't supposed to see, or found something that someone wants to keep hidden. Tommy thought about this, stroking Star's head absently. Like in the spy movies, when the witness has to be eliminated? Charlie nodded grimly. Something like that. A heavy silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft sound of Star's breathing. Tommy's mind raced with possibilities, each more fantastic than the last. But one thing was clear. Star was in danger, which meant he and Grandpa were in danger too. "What do we do now?" Tommy asked finally. "First we let Star rest and continue to heal," Charlie said, his practical nature reasserting itself. "Then we try to figure out what she knows that's so important." As if on cue, Star suddenly stood up, her ears perked forward in alert attention. But this time, she wasn't signaling danger. Instead, she limped purposefully to the backpack that Charlie had grabbed from the shed before they fled, the one containing her collar and the mysterious chip. "She wants to show us something," Tommy said, excitement cutting through his fear. Charlie brought the backpack over, and Star immediately began nosing at it, her intent unmistakable. When Charlie removed the collar and the embedded chip, Star's behavior became even more animated. "There's something about this chip she wants us to understand," Charlie murmured, turning it over in his hands. "But without special equipment, I can't read what's on it." Tommy's face fell, but then brightened as an idea struck him. "My tablet! I can use the internet to find out what kind of chip it is." Charlie looked skeptical. "I don't think it's that simple, buddy. This isn't a regular microchip for pets. It's military-grade technology." "But we have to try," Tommy insisted. "Star is trying to tell us something important." Before Charlie could respond, Star began pacing anxiously, her attention now fixed on the cabin's single window. A low growl rumbled in her throat, a warning. Charlie was on his feet instantly, dousing the fire and plunging the cabin into darkness. "Stay down," he whispered, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. In the moonlight outside, shadows moved among the trees. 1, 2, 3 figures, approaching the cabin with the stealth of predators stalking prey. "They followed us," Charlie breathed, his voice tight with disbelief. Tommy's blood ran cold. "How?" Charlie's eyes fell on Star, widening with sudden understanding. "The chip," he said. "It must have a tracking function. That's how they keep finding her, no matter where we hide." Fear gripped Tommy's heart like an icy fist. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. The mysterious pursuers had found them again, and this time there was no escape. But as he looked at Star, brave, loyal Star, who had already endured so much, Tommy felt a surge of determination that pushed back against his fear. They couldn't give up. Not now, not ever. "What do we do?" he whispered to his grandfather. Charlie's face hardened with resolve. "We stop running," he said quietly, "and we find out exactly what Star knows that these people are so desperate to keep secret." With practiced efficiency that spoke of his military past, Charlie moved around the cabin, securing doors and windows. He handed Tommy a flashlight and instructed him to stay in the bathroom, the only room without windows, with Star. "Whatever happens," Charlie said, gripping Tommy's shoulders firmly, "don't come out until I call for you. Understand?" Tommy nodded, his throat too tight with fear to speak. He hugged his grandfather fiercely, then retreated to the bathroom with Star, locking the door behind them. In the small, windowless space, Tommy sat on the closed toilet lid, Star pressed against his legs. The flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls as they waited, listening to Charlie's movements in the main room. Then, silence fell, a silence so complete that Tommy could hear his own heartbeat, the soft rasp of Star's breathing, the distant hoot of an owl outside. The cabin door creaked, a slow, deliberate sound that sent chills down Tommy's spine. Footsteps crossed the wooden floor, followed by Charlie's voice, steady and cold. "That's far enough." A woman's voice answered, smooth as silk but with edges like broken glass. "Mr. Jenkins, how unfortunate that we have to meet like this." "Ms. Reed," Charlie replied, confirming Tommy's suspicion about who had found them. "Or whatever your real name is. I'd say it's a pleasure, but I try not to lie to armed intruders." A soft laugh, utterly devoid of warmth. "Smart man. So, you figured out that I'm not from any animal shelter. Do you know who I really work for?" "I have my suspicions," Charlie said, "but why don't you enlighten me?" "That's not important," Ms. Reed dismissed. What is important is that you give me the dog and the chip she stole. Do that, and you and your grandson can go back to your quaint little life. And if I refuse? The menace in Ms. Reed's next words was unmistakable, even through the bathroom door. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mr. Jenkins. We know the boy is attached to the animal, but this is a matter of national security. In the bathroom, Tommy hugged Star tighter, burying his face in her fur to muffle his frightened breathing. National security? What could Star possibly know that was so important? As if sensing his question, Star suddenly tensed, pulling away from Tommy's embrace. She began pawing at the collar that Charlie had placed in the backpack before ushering them into the bathroom. "What is it, girl?" Tommy whispered, keeping his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry through the door. Star's pawing became more insistent. Tommy unzipped the backpack and removed the collar, examining it in the beam of the flashlight. There had to be something they were missing. Something beyond the chip itself. On a hunch, Tommy ran his fingers along the inside of the collar, feeling for anything unusual. Near the damaged section where the military insignia had been scratched out, his fingers detected a small irregularity, a hidden seam, different from the one that housed the tracking chip. Heart pounding with excitement, Tommy carefully pried at the seam with his fingernails. It resisted at first, then gave way suddenly, revealing a tiny hidden compartment he hadn't noticed before. Inside was a small, waterproof pouch, no bigger than a postage stamp. With trembling fingers, Tommy opened the pouch. It contained 2 items, a miniature USB drive, barely the size of his smallest fingernail, and a photograph, folded into quarters. Tommy carefully unfolded the photo, holding it under the flashlight. The image showed Star, healthier and prouder than he had ever seen her, standing beside a young woman in the military uniform. The woman was smiling, her arm draped affectionately over Star's back. On the back of the photo, someone had written a single line in neat, precise handwriting. "Remember Monument Creek, trust no one." Tommy's mind raced. This was it, the secret that Star had been protecting, the reason someone had tried to dispose of her. But what did it mean? What was Monument Creek, and why was it important? Before he could ponder further, a loud crash came from the main room, followed by the sounds of a struggle. Charlie's voice rose in anger, then pain. Something heavy fell, shaking the cabin's thin walls. Tommy's hand flew to his mouth, stifling a gasp of terror. Star was on her feet instantly, her hackles raised, a growl building in her throat. She looked at Tommy, then at the door, her intention clear. She wanted to help Charlie. "No," Tommy whispered urgently. "Grandpa said to stay here. We have to stay hidden." But the sounds of fighting continued, punctuated by a sharp cry from Charlie that made Tommy's heart constrict with fear. His grandfather was in trouble, possibly hurt. And it was all because of the secret hidden in Star's collar, a secret Tommy now held in his hands. The decision tore at him. Stay hidden as instructed, protecting Star and the mysterious USB drive, or help his grandfather, the only family he had left in the world. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. "Come on, girl," Tommy whispered, tucking the USB drive and photo securely into his sock. "Grandpa needs us." Quietly, he unlocked the bathroom door and eased it open just enough to peek into the main room. What he saw made his blood run cold. Charlie was on his knees, hands behind his head. Ms. Reed stood over him, her face no longer wearing its false smile, but twisted with cold fury. Behind her, 2 men in dark clothing surveyed the cabin, methodically searching through drawers and cabinets. "Last chance, Mr. Jenkins," Ms. Reed was saying. "Where is the dog and where is the storage device?" "I told you," Charlie replied, his voice strained but defiant. "I don't know anything about any storage device. And the dog ran off into the woods when we heard you coming." Ms. Reed sighed with exaggerated patience. "You're protecting your grandson. Admirable, but foolish." She nodded to one of her men. "Search the rest of the cabin. The boy must be hiding somewhere." Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs as the man approached the bathroom door. He backed away, looking frantically around the small space for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere, just a shower curtain that would offer no real concealment. As the doorknob began to turn, Tommy made a split-second decision. Dropping to his knees, he whispered urgently in Star's ear, "Help Grandpa, now!" The bathroom door swung open. The man had just enough time to register Tommy's presence before Star launched herself past him, a blur of fur and teeth heading straight for Ms. Reed. What happened next would change everything, but all Tommy could think about was the precious secret hidden in his sock, and the loyal dog who was fighting to protect them both. Could the mysterious USB drive and photo finally reveal why everyone is so desperate to find Star? What do you think is hidden at Monument Creek? Time seemed to slow down as Star launched herself across the cabin. Despite her injuries and weeks of mistreatment, she moved with the focused precision of the highly trained military dog she was. Ms. Reed had just enough time to widen her eyes in shock before Star slammed into her chest, sending her sprawling backward onto the floor. The two men reacted instantly, reaching for weapons concealed beneath their jackets. But Charlie was faster. The moment Star created the distraction, he lunged forward from his kneeling position, tackling the closest man at the knees and bringing him crashing down. Tommy stood frozen in the bathroom doorway, simultaneously terrified and awestruck. His grandfather moved with a speed and skill that seemed impossible for a man in his 70s, his weathered hands disarming the fallen attacker with practiced efficiency. "Tommy, run!" Charlie shouted, rolling away from a kick aimed at his head. "Take Star and go!" But there was nowhere to run. The remaining man blocked the cabin's only door, and Ms. Reed was already recovering from Star's attack, her hand reaching inside her jacket. Star stood protectively in front of Tommy, her hackles raised and teeth bared in a snarl that made her look twice her size. The message was clear. To get to the boy, they would have to go through her first. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the cabin's window shattered in an explosion of glass. A new figure vaulted through the opening, a woman in camouflage fatigues, her movements fluid and decisive. She landed in a crouch, assessed the scene in a split second, and moved with lethal grace. "Military police!" she barked, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "Everyone freeze!" Ms. Reed's hand stilled inside her jacket. Her eyes narrowed as they fixed on the newcomer, recognition and hatred flashing across her face. "Lieutenant Riley," she hissed, "always turning up where you're not wanted." "Special Agent Reed," the woman replied coldly. "Or should I say, former Agent Reed, you're a long way from your jurisdiction and way outside your authority." Tommy's mind raced to catch up with the rapidly changing situation. This new arrival, Lieutenant Riley, seemed to know Ms. Reed, and Star's reaction to her was completely different from her usual wariness around strangers. The German Shepherd's aggressive stance had softened, her tail giving a tentative wag of recognition. "Tommy," Charlie said quietly, not taking his eyes off the armed men, "is this the woman from the photograph?" Tommy nodded, suddenly understanding. "It's her, the soldier from the picture with Star." Lieutenant Riley's eyes flickered briefly to Tommy, then back to Ms. Reed and her men. "I see you've met my partner," she said, a hint of pride warming her professional tone. Echo is quite protective of those she considers friends. "Echo?" Tommy repeated, looking at Star with new understanding. So, that was her real name. "Release the boy and the old man," Lieutenant Riley continued, addressing Ms. Reed. "This operation is over. Your people at the warehouse have already been taken into custody." Ms. Reed's face contorted with fury. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Riley. This goes higher than you can imagine." "I know exactly what I'm interfering with," Riley countered. "Weapons theft, black market arms dealing, and attempted murder of a military working dog to cover it up. The director himself signed the arrest warrant." For a moment, the cabin hung in perfect stillness, a tableau of opposing forces caught in the moment before collision. Then everything happened at once. Ms. Reed lunged for Tommy, clearly intending to use him as a hostage. Star, or Echo, as Tommy now knew her, intercepted the move, clamping her jaws around Ms. Reed's arm with enough force to elicit a scream of pain. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Riley and Charlie moved against the remaining attackers, the cramped cabin erupting into a chaotic struggle of bodies. Tommy pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way while keeping his eyes on his grandfather. Despite his age, Charlie fought with surprising effectiveness, his movements suggesting years of training that Tommy had never known about. Within moments, the fight was over. Ms. Reed and her men lay face down on the cabin floor, Lieutenant Riley securing their hands behind their backs with plastic zip ties. "You okay, buddy?" Charlie called, his breathing heavy as he wiped blood from a cut on his cheek. Tommy nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Echo padded over to him, pressing reassuringly against his legs before moving to Lieutenant Riley, who knelt to embrace the dog with obvious emotion. "I thought I'd lost you, girl," Riley murmured, burying her face in Echo's fur. "When you disappeared during the raid, I feared the worst." Echo licked her handler's face, her entire body wiggling with joy at the reunion. The transformation was remarkable. The scared, injured dog Tommy had rescued from the suitcase was now alert, confident, and clearly overjoyed to be back with her partner. "Someone better start explaining what's going on," Charlie said, helping Tommy over to the sofa and positioning himself protectively beside his grandson. Lieutenant Riley straightened, wiping tears from her eyes. "You're right. You deserve to know everything." She pulled out a military ID card and handed it to Charlie. "First Lieutenant Emma Riley, Military Police Investigative Command. Echo is my partner, a specialized detection dog assigned to my unit." "What was she detecting?" Tommy asked, remembering what his grandfather had said about dogs trained to find specific things. "Electronic storage devices," Riley answered. "Echo is one of only a handful of dogs trained to detect the specific chemicals used in flash memory storage, USBs, SD cards, that sort of thing." Tommy's hand unconsciously moved to his sock, where the tiny USB drive was hidden. "Like this?" he asked, carefully extracting the device. Lieutenant Riley's eyes widened. "You found it?" she breathed. "Where?" "Hidden compartment in her collar," Charlie explained. "Tommy discovered it." Riley looked at Tommy with newfound respect. "Smart kid. That drive contains evidence of a massive arms theft operation. Echo and I were part of a team investigating weapons disappearing from military storage facilities across 3 states. "Agent Reed was involved?" Charlie guessed, nodding toward the woman glaring at them from the floor. "Reed isn't her real name, and she's no agent," Riley said grimly. "She's Meredith Winters, former military intelligence, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for selling classified information. She's been using her training and contacts to run one of the most sophisticated weapons theft rings we've ever seen." Tommy struggled to follow all the details, but he understood the core of it. Star, Echo, was a hero, and he had helped save her. 2 weeks ago, Riley continued, we raided a warehouse near Monument Creek where we believed the stolen weapons were being stored. The operation went bad. I was wounded, and in the chaos, Echo chased one of the suspects carrying electronic equipment. She disappeared. "They tried to kill her," Tommy said quietly, remembering the terrible condition Echo had been in when he found her. "They put her in a suitcase and threw her away like trash." Riley's face hardened. "They thought she was dead, or would be soon. What they didn't know was that Echo had already found what we needed most. That USB drive with their entire operation documented. Names, dates, locations, buyers. And when they realized she might have survived," Charlie added, "they came looking for her." "Exactly," Riley confirmed. "They couldn't risk her being found with that evidence. What they didn't count on was Echo finding a guardian angel." She smiled warmly at Tommy. "You saved her life." The reality of how close Echo had come to death and how lucky their meeting had been hit Tommy with full force. He wrapped his arms around the German shepherd, who responded by gently licking his cheek. "What happens now?" Charlie asked, the practical question cutting through the emotional moment. "Backup is on the way," Riley said, glancing at her watch. "We'll take Winters and her men into custody, and the evidence on that drive will put them away for a very long time." As if on cue, the sound of approaching vehicles filtered through the broken window. Minutes later, the small cabin was filled with military personnel in tactical gear, efficiently processing the scene and escorting the prisoners outside. A medic examined Charlie's injuries, declaring them minor but insisting on proper cleaning and bandaging. Another knelt to check Echo, professionally assessing the care Tommy had provided during her recovery. "You did a remarkable job with her wounds," the medic told Tommy, genuine admiration in his voice. "Most of these injuries could have become seriously infected without proper treatment." Pride swelled in Tommy's chest. He'd done it right. He'd saved Echo when she needed him most. As the activity around them began to settle, Riley approached Tommy again, this time with a more official demeanor. "I need to ask you something important, Tommy," she said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Echo has been through a traumatic experience. Her handler, that's me, was injured in the raid and has been recovering in the hospital until recently. Echo thought I was gone, maybe even dead." Tommy nodded slowly, a cold understanding beginning to form in his stomach. "You've come to take her back." Riley's expression softened. "She's a military working dog, Tommy. She has a job, responsibilities, but more than that, she and I are partners. We need each other. Tears welled in Tommy's eyes as the inevitable truth hit him. Of course Echo wasn't his to keep. She had a life, a purpose, a partner who loved her and needed her. The fantasy of keeping the German Shepherd as his own pet had always been just that, a fantasy. "I understand," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Charlie placed a comforting hand on Tommy's shoulder. "It's the right thing, buddy. Echo belongs with Lieutenant Riley, doing the important work she was trained for." Tommy nodded again, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He'd known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. In the few short days since finding her, Echo had become his friend, his secret, his responsibility. Letting her go felt like losing a part of himself. Echo sensed his distress, pressing closer and resting her head on his knee. Her amber eyes held the same intelligence and connection that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "She knows what you did for her," Riley said softly. "Military dogs are smart, but Echo is exceptional. She doesn't forget the people who matter to her." "Will I ever see her again?" Tommy asked, stroking Echo's head for what he feared might be the last time. Riley exchanged a glance with Charlie, some unspoken communication passing between the adults. "Actually," she said, "there's something we need to discuss about that." As the military personnel completed their work, Riley asked for a moment of privacy with Tommy, Charlie, and Echo. They gathered on the cabin's small porch, away from the bustle of the operation. "Echo's original handler was injured in the same raid where she disappeared," Riley explained. "He's recovering, but his injuries mean he won't be returning to active field duty." Tommy listened, not daring to hope where this might be leading. Normally, Echo would be reassigned to a new handler and continue her military service, Riley continued. But her recent trauma, combined with her age, she's 5 now, which is middle age for a working dog, makes her a candidate for early retirement. Charlie's eyebrows rose. "You're saying she could be released from service?" Riley nodded. "Under normal circumstances, retired military dogs are offered first to their handlers or to qualified military families. But given the exceptional circumstances and Echo's clear bond with Tommy, her handler has agreed to something different." Hope bloomed in Tommy's chest, so big and bright it almost hurt. "She could stay with us?" "Not full-time, at least not right away," Riley cautioned. "Echo needs specialized rehabilitation. I'll be overseeing that at a facility about an hour from here. But yes, with proper training for both of you and regular check-ins, Echo could eventually become your family dog." Tommy could hardly believe what he was hearing. The joy that flooded through him was almost too much to contain. "Really? She can be mine?" "Yours and your grandfather's," Riley corrected with a smile. "Echo is a highly trained military animal. She needs structure, exercise, and someone who understands her capabilities and needs." She turned to Charlie. I understand you were a veterinarian?" Charlie nodded. "For 40 years. Retired now, but I haven't forgotten how to care for animals." "And you have military experience?" Riley pressed, clearly having done her homework. "Army, 4 years," Charlie confirmed. "Nothing special, just a regular soldier doing his duty." Riley smiled. "You're being modest, Sergeant Jenkins. Your record suggests otherwise." Tommy looked at his grandfather with renewed wonder. There were so many things he didn't know about Grandpa Charlie, so many layers to the quiet, steady man who had raised him since his parents' death. "The point is," Riley continued, "between your grandfather's experience and your obvious bond with Echo, you might just be the perfect home for her. But it would be a responsibility, a serious one. Echo isn't just a pet. She's a trained service animal with specific needs." "We can do it," Tommy said with absolute conviction. "We'll do whatever it takes." Charlie squeezed his grandson's shoulder. "We'll make it work," he agreed. "That dog has become part of our family, whether we planned it or not." Riley seemed satisfied with their commitment. "There will be paperwork, home visits, training sessions. The military doesn't release its working dogs without ensuring they're going to suitable homes." "We understand," Charlie assured her, "and we're grateful for the opportunity." As the conversation concluded, activity at the cabin increased. More vehicles arrived, and Riley was called away to oversee the final stages of the operation. Tommy, Charlie, and Echo were escorted to a military SUV that would take them back to their cottage. "One of Echo's puppies?" Tommy repeated, not sure he had heard correctly. "What puppies?" Riley smiled. "I forgot to mention, Echo was pregnant when she disappeared. We didn't know it at the time. Has she shown any signs?" Tommy and Charlie exchanged startled glances. "No," Charlie said slowly, "but we weren't looking for them. And with her injuries and malnourishment, it might not have been obvious." A new urgency filled the air. Echo had been pregnant when Tommy found her. Was she still pregnant now, or had something happened to the puppies during her ordeal? "We need to get her checked immediately," Riley decided, motioning to one of the medics. "Full examination, including ultrasound if you have the equipment." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Echo was gently examined by military veterinarians using portable equipment brought to the scene. Tommy held her head throughout the procedure, murmuring reassurances as the vets palpated her abdomen and performed a portable ultrasound. "Remarkable," the chief veterinarian finally announced, pointing to the small screen. "Despite everything she's been through, they're still viable. 4 puppies, all with strong heartbeats." Tommy could hardly believe it. Not only had he saved Echo, but her unborn puppies as well. Life hidden within life, preserved against all odds. "The stress and malnutrition should have caused her to lose them," the vet continued, genuine amazement in his voice. "She must have been protecting them somehow, instinctively conserving resources even in her weakened state."
"She's a fighter," Riley said proudly. "Always has been."
As plans were made to transport Echo to a proper veterinary facility where she could receive the prenatal care she needed, Tommy found himself overwhelmed by the day's revelations. The dog he'd rescued from certain death was a hero, carrying not only evidence that would stop dangerous criminals, but new life as well. "The puppies will need homes too," Riley told Tommy quietly. "Once they're born and weaned, Echo's handler has authorized me to offer you first choice." Tommy's eyes widened. "You mean—"
"One of Echo's puppies could be yours, permanently and officially," Riley confirmed. "A thank you gift from Echo, her handler, and the United States military for your service in this matter."
Charlie cleared his throat, clearly moved by the offer. "That's very generous, thank you." As they prepared to leave the scene, Echo pressed close to Tommy's side, her warm presence a constant reassurance amid the chaos of the day. Despite all they'd been through, despite the danger and fear, Tommy felt an overwhelming sense of rightness. They had found each other when they needed each other most. In the SUV heading back to the cottage, Tommy leaned against Echo, exhaustion finally catching up with him. As his eyes grew heavy, he heard Lieutenant Riley speaking softly to his grandfather. "Echo's handler, Captain Martinez, is recovering well. He wants to meet the boy who saved his dog when he's released from the hospital next month. Would that be all right?" "Of course," Charlie replied. Tommy would like that. The conversation continued, adults making plans and arrangements that faded into the background as sleep claimed Tommy. His last conscious thought was of Echo, brave, loyal Echo, and the family they were becoming. When they arrived at the cottage, they found it had been cleaned and restored by military personnel. The damage from the earlier search had been repaired, furniture righted, broken items replaced. It was as if the invasion had never happened. Echo was settled in the living room on a proper dog bed provided by the military team, with specialized food and prenatal supplements arranged nearby. Tommy refused to leave her side, curling up on the sofa with his hand resting on her back. The emotional and physical exhaustion of the day caught up with him quickly, and he drifted into deep sleep, secure in the knowledge that Echo was safe, the bad people were caught, and somehow, against all odds, everything had worked out. But as the household settled into an exhausted calm, none of them realized that the danger wasn't entirely past. One loose end remained, a final threat that would test their newfound family bond to its limits. Echo's ears twitched in her sleep, her protective instincts still active even as she rested. Something wasn't right. Something was coming, and when it arrived, they would need to be ready. What do you think is the remaining threat that Echo senses? And will Tommy get to keep one of her puppies after they're born? Tommy woke to the sound of Echo's low, rumbling growl. Outside, dawn was just beginning to break, painting the cottage windows with pale golden light. For a moment, he was disoriented, memories of the previous day's events swirling in his mind like fragments of a dream. Then reality snapped into focus as Echo struggled to her feet, her amber eyes fixed on the front door, hackles raised. "What is it, girl?" Tommy whispered, instantly alert. After everything they'd been through, he'd learned to trust Echo's instincts implicitly. Echo's growl deepened, her body positioning itself between Tommy and the perceived threat. Despite her pregnancy and lingering injuries, she was every inch the trained military dog, prepared to defend at any cost. Tommy slipped from the sofa and padded silently to his grandfather's bedroom. "Grandpa," he called softly, pushing the door open. "Echo senses something." Charlie was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed with the telephone receiver in his hand. His expression was grim as he set it down. "Phone's dead," he said quietly, "and my cell has no signal." A chill ran down Tommy's spine. "Could be a storm," he suggested hopefully, but the clear morning light filtering through the windows belied that explanation. Charlie shook his head, reaching beneath his bed to pull out a long wooden box that Tommy had never seen before. "Not a storm," he said, opening the box to reveal an old hunting rifle. "Someone's cut the lines." The realization hit Tommy with sickening clarity. Despite yesterday's arrests, despite the military's assurances that the threat had been neutralized, someone was still out there, someone who wanted Echo, or the evidence she had helped uncover, badly enough to risk everything. "I thought they caught all the bad guys," Tommy said, his voice small with renewed fear. "Organizations like the one Lieutenant Riley described rarely operate with just a handful of people," Charlie explained, checking the rifle with practiced efficiency. Winters was likely just one cog in a larger machine. As if confirming his assessment, Echo's growl suddenly intensified. Outside, the crunch of footsteps on gravel announced the approach of visitors, multiple visitors, judging by the sound. "Back door," Charlie whispered, guiding Tommy toward the kitchen. "There's a path through the woods that leads to Old Man Wilson's farm. You take Echo and—" His instructions were cut short by a sharp, authoritative knock at the front door. "Mr. Jenkins," called a male voice. "This is Major Roberts, United States Army. We need to speak with you regarding yesterday's incident." Charlie and Tommy exchanged wary glances. The military presence made sense after yesterday's events, but the timing and the cut phone lines raised red flags. "Stay here," Charlie instructed, positioning himself in the hallway with a clear view of both front and back doors, the rifle held casually but ready. "Echo, guard," he added, using a command that Lieutenant Riley had taught them. Echo immediately positioned herself in front of Tommy, her stance alert but calm. She didn't seem to perceive the voice at the door as an immediate threat, which was somewhat reassuring. Charlie approached the front door cautiously. "Identification first," he called through the wood. There was a pause, then the sound of something sliding under the door, a military ID card that looked official at first glance. "Lieutenant Riley sent us," the voice continued. "There's been a development in the case. The suspects escaped during transport." Tommy's breath caught in his throat. Escaped? Winters and her men were free again? Charlie studied the ID card, his expression revealing nothing. But when he spoke again, his voice held a new edge. "Strange," he remarked conversationally. "Because Lieutenant Riley called an hour ago to check on Echo, and she didn't mention any escape." There was a telling silence from the other side of the door. Then, "Open the door, Jenkins. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." "I prefer the third option," Charlie replied calmly. "The one where you explain why you're impersonating military personnel and threatening a civilian household." The response was immediate and violent. The front door shuddered under a heavy impact, someone attempting to break it down. Simultaneously, there was a crash from the kitchen as the back door splintered inward. "Tommy, run!" Charlie shouted, raising the rifle as dark figures poured into the cottage. But there was nowhere to run. The house was surrounded, exits blocked by men in what Tommy now realized were fake military uniforms. One of them, the leader, judging by how the others deferred to him, stepped forward, his cold eyes fixing on Echo. "That dog has caused more trouble than it's worth," he said, his voice matching the one that had called through the door. "But orders are orders. We're taking it with us, alive, if possible." "And if we refuse?" Charlie challenged, the rifle steady in his hands. The man smiled thinly. "Then we take the dog, and you and the boy become regrettable casualties in an unfortunate home invasion. Your choice." Tommy knew with cold certainty that this man would kill them without hesitation. These weren't just criminals. They were professionals, trained killers who viewed human lives as acceptable collateral damage. Echo seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. Her growl had subsided into watchful silence, her eyes never leaving the intruders, waiting for the moment to act. "The dog is pregnant," Charlie said, playing for time. "She needs medical care, proper nutrition. If you take her now, you risk losing the litter." This information gave the leader pause. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his calculating gaze reassessing Echo. "That complicates things." Major, one of his men interrupted urgently. We have incoming, multiple vehicles approaching fast.
The leader's face hardened. Change of plans. We take the dog now. Secure the old man and the kid. Everything happened at once. Two men lunged for Charlie while another reached for Tommy. Echo exploded into action, a blur of fur and teeth intercepting the man reaching for the boy. Charlie swung the rifle like a club, connecting solidly with one attacker's head, then twisted to evade the other. Tommy found himself backed into a corner, Echo standing protectively before him as the room erupted into chaos. Despite her condition, Echo fought with ferocious determination, years of military training evident in every calculated move. But they were outnumbered and outmatched. One of the men produced a catch pole, the kind animal control officers use to restrain dangerous dogs, and managed to loop it around Echo's neck. Another grabbed Tommy, pinning his arms behind his back. Charlie was struggling with two attackers, blood streaming from a cut over his eye. "Stop fighting," the leader commanded, producing a tranquilizer gun and aiming it at Echo, "or I put the dog down right here." The threat froze everyone in place. Echo, restrained by the catch pole, continued to struggle, her eyes never leaving Tommy's face. "Please," Tommy begged, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Don't hurt her. She's going to have puppies." "That's why she's still alive, kid," the leader replied coldly. "My employer wants those puppies. Military working dogs with her genetics are worth a fortune on the international market." The realization hit Tommy like a physical blow. These people didn't care about the weapons theft evidence anymore. That had been exposed. Now they were after Echo herself and her unborn puppies to sell to the highest bidder. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the cottage windows exploded inward in a shower of glass. Smoke canisters bounced across the floor, rapidly filling the room with thick, disorienting fog. Shouted commands and the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground from multiple directions indicated a coordinated assault. "Military police! Everyone down!" Lieutenant Riley's voice cut through the chaos with commanding authority. Tommy dropped to the floor, as he'd been taught in school emergency drills, pulling Echo down with him. The catch pole slipped from her neck as her captor was tackled by a soldier in full tactical gear. Gunshots rang out, controlled, precise fire that Tommy later learned was aimed at legs and arms, designed to incapacitate rather than kill. The smoke made it impossible to see more than vague shapes moving through the cottage, but the sounds of the brief, intense conflict told the story. When the smoke finally began to clear, Tommy found himself being helped to his feet by a familiar face, Lieutenant Riley, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. "You okay, kid?" she asked, quickly checking him for injuries. Tommy nodded, his gaze immediately seeking Echo. The German Shepherd was being examined by a military veterinarian, her pregnant belly carefully palpated for signs of distress from the struggle. "Echo?" Tommy asked anxiously. "She's fine," Riley assured him. "Tough as nails, that one. And the puppies are okay, too, from the looks of it." Across the room, Charlie was receiving medical attention for his injuries while providing a statement to another officer. The fake military personnel, now revealed as mercenaries hired by associates of Winters, were being led away in handcuffs, their leader scowling in defeated rage. "How did you know?" Tommy asked Riley, watching the scene unfold around him with a sense of unreality. "Echo," Riley explained, a hint of pride in her voice. "After I called this morning, something felt off about the connection. So, I dispatched a patrol to check on you. When they reported suspicious activity around the property, we mobilized the full team." Tommy processed this information, relief washing over him in waves. "So, it's really over now? They're all caught?" Riley nodded. "The weapons theft ring has been dismantled. With the evidence Echo recovered and the testimonies we've gathered, they'll be locked away for a very long time." As the military police secured the scene, Tommy was reunited with Echo, who greeted him with gentle licks and a soft whine of concern. Despite her own ordeal, her first instinct was still to check on him, to make sure he was safe. "You're amazing," Tommy whispered, burying his face in her fur. "The bravest dog ever." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The cottage was cleared of broken glass and debris, temporary repairs made to the doors and windows. Tommy and Charlie gave official statements, recounting everything from the moment Tommy had discovered Echo in the abandoned suitcase to the final confrontation that morning. By mid-afternoon, a more pressing concern emerged. Echo had begun panting heavily, her sides heaving with contractions. The stress of the attack had triggered labor. We need to get her to a proper facility, the military veterinarian insisted, but one look at Echo's condition made it clear there wasn't time. I can help, Charlie said, stepping forward with quiet confidence. I delivered countless litters in my practice. Riley hesitated, then nodded her approval. Set up a birthing station. I'll stay in contact with our veterinary unit for backup if needed. The living room was quickly transformed into an impromptu delivery room. Clean blankets were laid out, hot water prepared, and medical supplies arranged within easy reach. Tommy was assigned the crucial role of keeping Echo calm, stroking her head and speaking soothingly to her as the contractions intensified. "You're doing great, girl," he encouraged her, echoing his grandfather's gentle instructions. "Just a little longer." Echo's amber eyes never left Tommy's face, the trust in them absolute. Whatever pain she was experiencing, whatever fear she might feel, she drew strength from his presence, just as he had drawn courage from hers during their shared ordeal. Outside, the day had turned stormy, dark clouds gathering ominously overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Echo's labor progressed, nature's drama providing a fitting backdrop to the miracle unfolding within the cottage walls. "Here comes the first one," Charlie announced, his hands steady and sure as he guided Echo through the delivery. "Tommy, keep talking to her. She needs to know everything's okay." Tommy continued his stream of gentle reassurances, watching in awe as the first puppy emerged, a tiny wet bundle that Charlie quickly cleaned and placed near Echo's head. Mother and puppy met for the first time, Echo's tongue carefully cleaning the newcomer as instinct took over. "It's a boy," Charlie reported, his professional demeanor momentarily softening with wonder. "Healthy and strong." The second puppy followed shortly after, then the third. Each arrival brought a fresh wave of emotion through the room, the contrast between the violence of the morning and the pure miracle of new life creating a powerful resonance that touched everyone present. As Echo prepared to deliver the fourth and final puppy, complications arose. The puppy was positioned incorrectly, struggling to emerge. "She's getting tired," Charlie murmured, concern etching lines in his weathered face. "And this little one is stuck." Riley, who had been maintaining a respectful distance, approached with a satellite phone. "Our veterinary unit is standing by. They can talk you through it." But Charlie shook his head. "No time for consultations. I need small hands." He looked at Tommy. "Can you help, buddy? I need you to do exactly what I tell you." Terror and determination warred in Tommy's chest. Echo needed him. The unborn puppy needed him. This was what it meant to be responsible for another life, to do what was necessary, even when it was difficult or frightening. "Tell me what to do," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Under Charlie's precise instructions, Tommy carefully helped reposition the struggling puppy, his small hands proving perfect for the delicate task. Echo remained remarkably calm throughout, her trust in both Tommy and Charlie never wavering despite her discomfort. Finally, with a last gentle assistance from Tommy, the fourth puppy emerged, the smallest of the litter, but alive and quickly responding to Echo's attentive cleaning. "You did it," Charlie told Tommy, naked pride in his voice. "You saved that puppy's life." Exhausted but triumphant, Echo curled around her four newborns as they nursed for the first time. The storm outside had passed, sunlight now streaming through the windows to illuminate the peaceful scene. Lieutenant Riley, who had witnessed the entire birth with quiet respect, approached Tommy as he sat beside Echo, gently stroking her head while she nursed her puppies. "You've got a gift," Riley told him. "Echo doesn't trust easily, especially after what she's been through, but she trusts you completely." Tommy smiled, watching the tiny puppies squirming against their mother's belly. "We understand each other," he said simply. "Captain Martinez, Echo's handler, has been updated on everything that's happened," Riley continued. "He's being discharged from the hospital next week and wants to meet you in person. And," she paused, a smile touching her lips, "he's confirmed that one of these puppies is yours, as promised. You've more than earned it." Joy burst in Tommy's chest like fireworks. "Really? Which one?" "Your choice," Riley replied, "although I'd recommend waiting a few weeks to see their personalities develop. Echo will need to stay with them until they're weaned, of course, but we've arranged for her rehabilitation to take place here, with regular visits from our veterinary team." "So, she's staying with us?" Tommy clarified, hardly daring to believe his good fortune. Riley nodded. "Until the puppies are weaned. After that, she'll return to limited duty with Captain Martinez.
but one of her puppies will be yours permanently.
It wasn't perfect. Tommy would still have to say goodbye to Echo eventually. But it was more than he had dared to hope for just days ago when he'd found her abandoned in that suitcase by the road.
In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Echo and her puppies became the center of the household, their care a shared responsibility that brought Tommy and Charlie closer than ever before. The military maintained a subtle presence, security measures implemented to ensure no further threats emerged. Tommy spent every available moment with the growing puppies, carefully observing their distinct personalities as they emerged. The smallest one, the puppy he had helped deliver, seemed to share a special bond with him, often crawling into his lap when the others were playing elsewhere. "I think she's chosen you," Charlie observed one evening, watching as the tiny female puppy abandoned a tug-of-war with her siblings to curl up on Tommy's feet. Tommy smiled, gently lifting the puppy to eye level. "I'm going to call her Hope," he decided, "because that's what Echo gave me when I found her. Hope that I could make a difference." A month after the puppy's birth, Captain Martinez finally visited the cottage. He arrived with Lieutenant Riley, walking with a slight limp, but otherwise appearing healthy and strong. Echo's reaction to seeing her original handler was emotional for everyone to witness, her entire body wriggling with joy as she greeted the man she had clearly feared she would never see again. "Thank you," Martinez told Tommy, his voice thick with emotion, "for saving my partner when I couldn't be there for her. You're a remarkable young man." Tommy ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise but secretly pleased. "She saved me too," he said, "in lots of ways." As summer turned to fall, the inevitable day approached when Echo would return to service with Captain Martinez. The puppies, now weaned and increasingly independent, had all found homes, 3 going to carefully vetted military families, and Hope remaining with Tommy and Charlie. On Echo's last day at the cottage, Tommy took her for a final walk to the spot where he had first found her, the roadside where a cruel act had led to an extraordinary friendship. The old suitcase was long gone, but Tommy would never forget the sight of Echo curled inside it, wounded but unbowed. "I'll miss you," he told her, kneeling to embrace the healthy, strong dog that bore little resemblance to the injured animal he had rescued. "But I'll always know you're out there, being a hero." Echo licked his face, her amber eyes communicating more clearly than words ever could. The bond between them transcended their brief time together. It was something permanent, unbreakable. When Captain Martinez arrived to take Echo, the goodbye was tearful but not tragic. Tommy had hope now, a living legacy of Echo's time with them, and a constant reminder of the difference one small act of kindness could make in the world. As Echo climbed into Martinez's truck, she looked back one last time at the boy who had saved her life. In that moment, Tommy knew with absolute certainty that they would meet again. Charlie stood beside Tommy, Hope cradled in his arms, as they watched the truck disappear down the driveway. "You know," Charlie said thoughtfully, "your grandmother always said that animals come into our lives for a reason." Tommy nodded, wiping away a tear. "Echo came to teach us about courage," he said with the simple wisdom of a child who had learned life's most important lessons early. "And Hope came to remind us that good things can come from bad situations, if you're brave enough to help." Charlie smiled, ruffling his grandson's hair. "Couldn't have said it better myself, buddy." As they turned back toward the cottage, Hope wriggling to be set down so she could walk beside her new family, Tommy felt a sense of completion. The adventure had changed him, had changed all of them, in ways that would ripple through their lives forever. Echo had arrived in a suitcase, abandoned and left to die. She would depart a hero, having saved not just evidence of crimes, but the lives of those who had saved her. And in between those 2 moments, she had given Tommy the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that even the smallest person can make a difference when they act with courage and compassion. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Don't forget to comment below with your thoughts on Tommy and Echo's journey. What was your favorite part of their amazing adventure?